All right, look, let's get started, right? So, confidential, decentralized identity. Let's identify a few of these keywords and look into what is the architecture or sort of the principles and guidelines that are behind this topic. Now, before we start, why should we care about it? Right? So, why this is important now? Well, let me tell you one thing. Over 1 billion people worldwide are unable to prove their identity. Any recognized means. And I'm not talking about digital identity, your ID card, your passport, your driving license. Now, I'm not making up these figures. This is World Bank uh, figures. There is a link in the slide. I'm happy to share it later where you can read about it. So, as such, 1 billion people are without protection of the law. They are unable to access basic services, education, employment. They cannot participate as a citizen. They cannot transact in the modern economy, right? And obviously, you can understand that most of these people affected are very likely children. Many are refugees. They are forcibly displaced. They are stateless people. So we want to do something about it. And I'm sure that you would agree with me. Now, the ability to prove one identity is a fundamental right, human right, a universal human right. Identity is vital. Political, economics, social opportunity, just be connected, right? But you know what? System of identifications are paper-based, are archaic, insecure. They sort of lack adequate privacy protection. And, for over 1 billion people, they're not even accessible. So let me think this through. Not only there is a lack of protection on accessing legal documentation, but for one in how many people are on Earth? 8 billion. So for 1 in 8 people, which is a lot, right? There is an inability even to access these basic services, fundamental services. We have an identity gap. Well, and obviously this can go on and on, and you see the larger risk here: displacement, child trafficking. A lot can happen now. So we must close this gap as individual, responsible individual. We must have control over our own identity. And here is where I want to stress the importance of it: is our own identity. This is not about an email address that is controlled by Microsoft account, Google account, whatever that is, and it's not even about a passport or driving license or a degree certificate issued by some government or universities or some form of authorities. Here is about our own identity. How personal data is collected, is used, is shared. Right? So you start seeing here already a little bit of the problems that we currently have with identity in general, with the traditional identity. And obviously, by extension, also with the digital form of identity, which enables us to access the connected world and the social platform and everything else that comes with it. So there is a problem of access to data, but it's not just about it. There is a problem that goes beyond access to personal information. Where data resides? Who is storing it? Who retains your data after it's been used? I authenticate into one system. I share airlines. I share my passport details for the sake of checking in online on a flight. What happens to my passport details after that? Who is storing? Who is retaining your data? Where is this stored? How are they using it? Are they sharing with third parties? whom, as an individual, a person, has access to it? Are they sharing it with someone else? These are all current challenges of the way identity, centralized identity, right, own control by authorities, have currently. And look, obviously, by extension, this goes also with digital ID, right? Digital identity. And nowadays, we cannot live without digital identity. Enables transaction on every sort of account, from electronic tickets, digital wallets, online banking, social media accounts. A lot is digital. And I travel relatively a lot, apply for visas, and a lot of these transactions are nowadays digital as well. Probably the last form of paper-based identity is really passport that you show customs at borders, immigration, and already there. Some countries like Singapore are moving into e-passports already. So the process of digitization is growing faster and faster, which is a good thing, in my opinion. But this brings challenges on where this data is being stored. These forms of digital ID that allows us to travel, conduct business, access financial information, health records. My health record, I live in Australia, as I mentioned in the beginning, is completely digitized, is controlled on by the government. And they store it, they know everything about me, and it is shared with other parties that have access to my e-health record, electronic health record. So there are some challenges there, okay? Digital identities bring some risk, and although they are vital for any form of interaction with the world, these are the risks that I mentioned. We need a new form of identity. That's granted. And let me get into this new form of identity. A lot of, not probably buzzword, but a lot of conversation is happening around what is self-sovereign identity. So a new form of identity that puts together digital technologies, but also the ability to keep control on your identity itself. So something that you as an individual own, that you don't rely on other form of authorities, but you still have the possibility to protect and provide the level of privacy and disclose only the information that you need to disclose. If, I need to access I need to travel and I'm booking a flight, and the information that I need to disclose with the airlines is my citizenship, right? To see if I'm allowed to travel to that specific country, visa-free or whatever that is. Why am I sharing a lot of other information, including my date of birth or permanent address or whatever other piece of information, piece of personal identifiable information that are not required for that transaction? I want to be able to disclose only the pieces of my identity that are required to complete the transaction, and not more than that. So this is where this new form of identity will help defining more control, more ownership. Now, there is an acronym. There are many acronyms in the world. There is an acronym specifically, which is DID, Decentralized Identity, where the D is digital, is decentralized. But here I want to tell you a story where the decentralized part of it is not necessarily what you're thinking of, which is blockchain. And the reason I'm saying that is that I heard a lot of horror stories about identities being stored on blockchain networks. And don't get me wrong, I'm a big blockchain fan. I'm a Web3 architect as a job by day. I wrote a book about blockchain. So I'm strongly believer in blockchain, Web3 technology. At the same time, I also conscious of the social impact of it. And when I say this, the horror story that I heard is identities try to be located or stored on Bitcoin networks. And again, nothing wrong with it. The technology is perfect. It's been around for 15 years, Bitcoin, and has never been compromised or hacked, right? So I don't know, think of any technology in the world that has never been hacked. Think about it. Think again. There isn't. Bitcoin is, okay? So from a technical perspective, it would be the perfect space. But we are humans. We're not perfect. From an emotional perspective, knowing that my identity is stored on a Bitcoin network or, blockchain, Ethereum, whatever, let me think twice about it, okay? So with that premises, what I want to present now is sort of a hybrid thing, where decentralized has some component of a digital ledger, potentially on a blockchain network, but it doesn't have to stick to Bitcoin or Ethereum, and certainly not for storing data. So yes, we get the benefit of the immutability of the digital ledger. We get the benefit of a tamper-proof censorship resistance that blockchain offers. But at the same time, I also want to make sure that I have the reassurance that my identity, my data points are stored securely by some sort of governance, with some sort of governance that provide a level of trust. I'll be clear in a moment. Let me give you just a primer on DID, because obviously I appreciate that not everybody may be familiar with what DID is and what it can do. 1 second, I need to move a window here to make it clear for me. Here we go. All right, so I borrowed this diagram from a white paper that Microsoft wrote some time ago around DID, decentralized identity. Very briefly, there are some identifier, DID identifier, that are sort of standardized. No, the W3C is working on it, has already produced, I believe, version 1.0 something of some identifier of identities, but there are 190 plus countries in the world, a lot of different type of documents, and identity is not just about ID documents, right? Passport, driving license, ID cards, but is in general also any form of credentials that can be verified, like your school study, your social club cards, anything that identifies something of you as an individual. So there are some identifiers, and these identifiers have to be sort of provided to the entity that needs to consume them. So as an individual, I use my app, the user agent, to provide the level of authentication. Now, these identifiers have to be stored somewhere, and I need a way to find them in this storage, because there are billions and billions of these data points, and obtain a sort of attestation which basically guarantees that the storage is genuine, has not been compromised, and the identifier is that identifies me as an individual, and it's been issued by an entity, government, a university, whatever that is recognized and has a reputation. So there are some universal resolvers that look for the identity hub, and the hub is where the identity is actually stored. At the bottom of this sort of diagram, of this architecture, you can see the decentralized architecture. Blockchain, yes, for sure, why not? Digital ledger in general can totally be cloud-based, obviously, but the idea is we store our data points, our identifier, in trusted identity hubs. I'll come back on that in a moment. And the transaction, so me as an individual, I transfer only the data points or the pieces of information that I want to disclose with a party that is verifying my identity. And this transaction is recorded on a transparent, immutable ledger. Confidential ledger? Why not? Can be, but we'll get back in a moment. I want to just very briefly mention a use case, something that I've been personally affected when I immigrated to Australia 11 years ago. And then, funny story, I've been working on with the government here on some sort of technical implementation a few years ago. When I immigrated for the first time to this country, I had to provide evidence of knowledge of English, degree, university, some form of identities in general. So the idea was get to my university, a copy of my degree certificate, scan it, PDF, send it for verification. Hello world, what can possibly go wrong? Nothing went wrong in my case, but thousands and thousands of applications every month, every year, and easily realized that it's not possible to verify all of them. Degrees can be counterfeited, photoshopped, anything can happen, right? So the ability to verify at scale cannot be borne by humans. That's impossible. So the idea with verifiable credentials is that there is still a government or an authority, in this case a university, that issue the certificate itself as a reputation, and we will appreciate how this reputation is built in a moment. And I decide to disclose only these pieces of information with the immigration department, in my case, which the pieces of information, in this case the degree certificates, are stored in a trusted identity hub. The transaction is recorded on the digital ledger, and the verification happens on the digital ledger because we are not comparing the content of the document itself. So we're not opening the PDF and check that actually it's correct, and then maybe phone the university and check that is true or not, and there is lost in translation between Italy, where I'm from, and Australia, and so on, right? Actually, everything happens digitally because the content is hashed. As you know, hashing is a technology for one-way producing a sort of a fingerprint of a unique identifier of a piece of content, storing these safely on the blockchain and verifying only the hash value. If a single byte has been modified into the original document, the hash value will be completely different. Hence, the verification will fail. But I can talk here for hours, if not even days and days, okay? So, in the interest of time, and obviously to keep the conversation around the topic of today, which is confidential DIDs, let us focus on the identity hubs. Here is where I want to attract your attention and get back, obviously, to the point of being confidential. Just to get to the point, a transaction happens the way I described, briefly. As a user agent, so using my app, my device, I use a key, my private key, to identify the payload, so the credentials or the identifier, the identity identifier that I want to share. My key will sign that this payload, this identity for me. The identity hub of reference will be used through the resolvers to identify where the actual data is stored. And then there is a way also of sharing some additional information for recovery in case identity is lost. I'm not going to go too much in detail now, but just want to give you the idea that a transaction basically happens with asymmetric encryption, with a way of identifying where this is coming from, where this is going. And more important, it basically allows to record this on a decentralized system, so this transaction on a decentralized system, so to have evidence that the transaction actually happened at some point. And now, what is the problem that you're trying to resolve? Why I cannot just, send an email with my document in attachment and say, hey, this is my certificate degree? It's a problem of trust, right? It's a problem of creating or closing the triangle of trust between who is issuing the certificate, who is verifying, and who is holding. Now, anybody can create a document, digital document, but also in the DID world, in the digital identity world, anybody can create a DID and say, hey, this is me. Oh, hey, this is my certificate of degrees. This is my passport. This is my whatever club membership card. So DIDs begin with no evidence of proof. And this is important to understand. There is not whatsoever reassurance that this authority is actually owning the issuer, owning any credential, any credibility on the certificate itself. Anybody can do it. But DIDs requires endorsement from existing trust providers, institutions, government, businesses. So this is bringing back an important point. Now, when I mentioned decentralized identity, again, connection with blockchain and everything else, a lot of people may step back and say, oh, you're telling me that now we don't need government any longer, we don't need universities and these sort of things. That's not what I'm saying. DIDs still require government as an issuer of verifiable credential with a reputation. Without trust, there cannot be any form of verification of digital identity. So basically, holders of identity, us as individual, but also the issuer, should be able to choose where they store their credential. And this is where we get back to the confidential computing infrastructure. And I know it's been a little bit of a long journey because there is so much that can be said about decentralization of identities. But just to wrap up here, confidential computing infrastructure, multiple hubs around the world can create the necessary distributed network, any cloud provider, for storing and securing identity elements at scale. And you know the benefit of confidential computing. You've been heard all day today. I'm not going to repeat it, but even the cloud provider cannot access your data that is stored inside these hubs. Here is the opportunity. Public cloud providers can provide confidential identity hubs across multiple regions. So they are centralized in terms of storage, but decentralized in terms of regional distribution. Obviously, security, confidentiality, redundancy of the network provides the level of also reassurance that data cannot be compromised in one single point. Privacy is guaranteed by confidential computing, even from the cloud provider. And the governance, so all the transactions stored on the digital ledger as an evidence of that a transaction actually happened. Now, I want to make one last point, just to make sure that I'm absolutely clear on the relationship between DID and government is not about removing government authorities. DID is about helping authorities focus on what they should do better, which is issuing and verifying credentials, not storing, not securing it. This is what technology providers do the best. The technology providers, the cloud providers, have the technology, the infrastructure to secure identities and offering as a service to cloud providers. The decentralization part of it is a way to reduce risk of tampering with data, because basically what it does, it just reduces the attack surface for all the hackers, for all the bad people out there. So few highly valuable targets, the identity hubs that contains billions and billions of data points, will be completely decentralized. Many targets with little data, but more important, all the transactions will be completely decentralized by removing single point of failures. So this sort of a hybrid combination between, let's call it blockchain or decentralized ledger that store the transaction, encrypted, so there is no risk for being tampered, bringing the robustness of the blockchain technology, and the confidential computing infrastructure that actually stores keys and documents, provide that level of scalability, privacy, confidentiality that digital identity should have in the modern world to enable modern transaction. That's all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention. I am available for any questions.